Working at a gas station might not sound like anyone's version of a dream job, but for me, Alex then, it was a means to an end. A way to pay for my first semester of college, hoping to one day become a veterinary assistant. That was 3 years ago. I thought I was simply finding a job, not stumbling into a hidden world of the bizarre. The strange truth about that gas station, about the purple skies and the unseen entities, is a story for another time. My real journey, the one that splintered my understanding of reality and then painstakingly reassembled it, began when I finally left that place behind. It wasn't the shadowy figures or the sky bleeding purple that finally drove me away. It was the oppressive weight of normalcy that settled in after the chaos subsided. The world felt too muted, too safe. I craved something new, something remote, a place where the mundane was an impossible concept. So, with the echoes of the Watcher and the unsettling memory of invisible horrors still clinging to me, I packed my bags, whispered a silent farewell to Tic Tac and Old Sarge in my mind, and set out. My name is Alex, and I was desperately seeking a new kind of quiet, a profound, echoing solitude that only the very edge of the world could offer. It was late spring, the air still biting with the raw, untamed chill of winter, when a faded advertisement caught my eye online. Lighthouse keeper wanted, remote island location. It was brief, almost dismissive, offering scant details beyond a contact number and a stark promise of isolation. Perfect. I needed to outrun the lingering whispers of my past and the pervasive unease of what I'd witnessed. I craved the kind of silence that only the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean could provide. I applied, went through a shockingly brief interview, mostly just confirming I wasn't prone to fits of madness from loneliness or a crippling fear of heights, and within 2 weeks I found myself on a small battered ferry heading towards a barely visible speck on the horizon. The island was a brutal, unforgiving mass known as Blackwood Point. It was less an island and more a jagged, ancient outcrop of dark, primordial rock, relentlessly hammered by the ceaseless, churning waves. The lighthouse itself stood like a defiant, stark white sentinel, a formidable beacon against the perpetually brooding grey sky. It was undeniably ancient, forged from hand-hewn stone, crowned with a massive, gleaming lantern room that hummed with an almost alive, quiet power. As the ferry cut through the choppy water, I could just make out the stoic silhouette of a man standing at the very base of the lighthouse, a lone figure watching our approach with unnerving intensity. He was tall, lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved by 1,000 gales, and eyes that held the weary, profound weight of every storm the ocean had ever unleashed. His name was Silas Thorne, the current keeper. He didn't offer a handshake, just a curt, almost imperceptible nod as I stepped onto the slick, rocky shore. "You here for the job?" he rasped, his voice a dry, gravelly sound, like stones ceaselessly tumbling in the furious surf. Yes," I managed to mumble, a wave of familiar awkwardness washing over me. "How'd you know?" "The gulls told me you were coming," he replied, without breaking eye contact, then slowly, deliberately looked up at a circling, squawking flock of seabirds. "Gulls," I repeated, a sudden, sharp jolt of unsettling familiarity striking me. "Aye," he nodded, his gaze still fixed on the sky. "They're always watching, keepers of the deep. They relish the scraps from my fishing, and in return they give me information, warnings." I tried to process this, the strange, unsettling familiarity of it all. Sure," I mumbled, a distinct and unwelcome thread of doubt beginning to weave its way into my thoughts. Was this going to be another one of those places? "You capable of working nights?" Silas continued, seemingly oblivious to my internal turmoil, his voice flat and unyielding. "If you are, the pay is $30 an hour, from the exact moment dusk settles till the first sliver of dawn. Tuesdays off. I take the day shift. That's when the fragile supply boats dare to arrive, and you take nights. It'll just be the two of us out here, and the gulls." $30 an hour, For what seemed like an impossibly isolated, potentially monotonous job, it sounded absurdly generous, almost too good to be true. But after my last experience, where the absurd became terrifyingly real, I was more than willing to embrace the strange, without a flicker of hesitation, without a single question about the gulls or the vague information. I took the job. I needed this. I needed to prove to myself I wasn't crazy, that the last place was just a fluke. I showed up for work that evening at precisely 5:30. Silas, a man of few words, gave me a whirlwind tour. The living quarters were Spartan, stripped bare of any comfort, yet functional. A small utilitarian kitchen, a hard cot, and a basic desk. He showed me how to operate the ancient colossal Fresnel lens, a magnificent contraption of gleaming glass and polished brass that hummed with a quiet, almost living power. He meticulously explained the daily routine, cleaning the colossal lens until it sparkled, polishing the brass until it gleamed like gold, scrupulously checking the fuel levels. He also pressed a satellite phone into my hand, along with his emergency contact number and a heavy rusty key to the main door. "Help yourself to the dried fish and hardtack in the pantry," he said, his eyes unwavering. "There's a small temperamental stove if you want to boil water for tea, but don't expect luxury." Then, with a creak and groan, he unlocked a heavy, sea-stained wooden chest, tucked away beneath a dusty, cluttered chart table, and carefully brought out a thick, leather-bound journal. Its cover was scarred, its pages worn, like it held countless untold secrets. "Now this here," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious, almost reverent tone, his gaze hardening, "is what you really do. Read this after I leave. You're not going to believe everything at first, not a single word of it, but eventually you will. Just do your absolute best. And the gulls, mind you, they will warn you if anything is coming, anything at all." I opened my mouth to ask what exactly could be coming. A storm, another lost fisherman, but he simply shook his head, tapped the journal with a gnarled finger, and said he was going to check the lobster pots before the tide turned against him. He would see me at dawn, precisely when the first light touched the horizon. Then he walked slowly, deliberately, out into the rapidly fading light, his gaunt figure swallowed by the creeping mist. As he made his way down to the treacherous rocky shore, he disappeared without a backward glance. I stood by the heavy oak door, the silence of the lighthouse pressing in on me. I looked up at the circling gulls, their cries suddenly more mournful, and whispered, "Okay, gulls, I guess it's just you and me for the rest of the night, my new guardians." The first thing I did, as the last vestiges of daylight vanished, was to familiarize myself with every inch of the lighthouse. I checked the engine room, a cramped space filled with the rhythmic thrum of machinery. I ascended the winding, dizzying staircase, feeling the cool stone beneath my fingertips. I entered the lantern room, the colossal lens glowing softly, patiently waiting for its nightly ritual. All clear, all accounted for. That done, I grabbed a piece of hardtack from the pantry. It was surprisingly, almost disturbingly edible, settled onto the worn stool in the lantern room, and, with a growing sense of dread and anticipation, opened the thick leather-bound journal. Listed in numerical order, in careful, precise, hand-scribed letters, were several pages of instructions that seemed to defy all logic or reason. 1. Do not alter this journal. Do not erase or change any words. When new information is discovered, add to the back of the list clearly and concisely. 2. Vessels. If ships ask about safe harbor, direct them 200 miles north to the port of Seabrook. Tell them about Seabrook's deep water channels, its gleaming modern docks, and the welcoming, unsuspecting community. Play it up as best you can. Make it sound like a paradise. If they insist on anchoring near Blackwood Point, check their cargo for anything emitting a strong, unnatural phosphorescence. This is paramount. Do anything you can, from offering lavish fresh provisions to outright subtle sabotaging of their anchor chain, anything to get them to leave anything phosphorescent behind. Be creative, be relentless. 3. Strong phosphorescence attracts the dweller. Never, under any circumstances, sail near Blackwood Point with a phosphorescent cargo. In fact, it's best if you don't bring anything phosphorescent while you're anchored here, not even a luminous wristwatch, no glowing fish, no luminous algae, and absolutely do not leave anything phosphorescent on deck. It's an invitation. It usually never comes this close to the surface. It prefers the crushing depths, but better safe than sorry. One false move can be catastrophic. I stopped reading, my breath catching in my throat, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I picked up my half-eaten hardtack, no longer tasting it, and walked over to the observation window, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. When I peered out into the deepening gloom, the wind howled around the tower like a hungry beast. The gulls, now silent, perched on the rocky ledges below, seemed to tilt their heads, their beady eyes giving me an unnerving, knowing stare. I sighed, a shaky breath escaping my lips, and looked out at the churning, inky sea. There were no ships in sight. To the left, the dark, menacing waters stretched endlessly towards the terrifying open ocean. A mile to the right, the jagged, unforgiving coastline of the mainland began to rise into towering, desolate cliffs, and then disappeared abruptly into the swirling mists. This was my moment of truth, my time for a decision. Did I stay, or did I turn and run, escape this growing dread? $30 an hour was a lot to give up for what seemed like an impossibly easy job. Was the old man utterly insane? I didn't know, but at least he didn't seem dangerous. Not in the way some people I'd met previously had been. I decided I'd give it 2 weeks. 2 weeks to see how things unfolded. 2 weeks to determine if this was just a harmless eccentricity or something far more sinister. I had given my word to do this job, and I would see it through to the absolute best of my ability. No turning back. I went back inside, the chill of the night seeping into my bones, and taking my place by the soft, reassuring glow of the colossal lens. I continued reading, each word pulling me deeper into this unsettling reality. 4. The gulls are an early warning beacon, a living alarm system. They will tell you with their frantic cries when something's coming. They are never wrong. When you hear their piercing, desperate cries, you may expect visitors to arrive shortly, or something far worse. Every morning at dawn, precisely as the first light breaks, retrieve the large fishing net from the lower deck and use it to fill the gull's feeding trough. It's carved deep into the unforgiving rock face, directly below the lantern room. Fill it to the absolute brim with fresh, gleaming fish and a generous sprinkling of iridescent crushed shells. That's the only shimmer they like, the only payment they accept. This is their sacred payment as guardians of the deep. Do this every morning. Never forget, your life and the lives of others may depend on it. 5. If you see a large, heavily scarred great white shark circling the lighthouse, listen to it. He's more than just a predator. That's Old Scar, and he's here to help when things go catastrophically bad. He's an ally. 6. Every 30 minutes. Check the pressure gauges in the engine room. If you don't keep the pressure perfectly steady, the light will flicker and dim, a dangerous weakness in the face of the unseen. 7. If you ever see black lightning in an approaching storm, a phenomenon that defies all natural law, get out the emergency foghorn and the massive blaring danger abyssal shift sign from the storage room and shut down all shipping lanes around the island immediately, no exceptions. 8. If the ocean over the deepest trench ever turns a deep emerald green, a color that screams unnatural, this is a code emerald. This is the highest alert. Load all the emergency flares into the small skiff. It's always docked below, perpetually ready. Then close the shipping lanes and evacuate all nearby vessels. Every single one. Search all 7 underwater caves meticulously, looking for anchored ships. Get the sailors and divers out immediately. Say whatever you have to. Lie, threaten. Just get every single person out of the water, no matter the cost. 9. Keep the lantern fuel tank full. If it goes below the halfway mark, refill it immediately. Your light is their only hope. That was the end of the core weird instructions. There were several more pages, but they were mostly scribbled, frantic notes, almost illegible at times. I kept reading, poring over every word, until I got to a chilling paragraph titled Possible Countermeasures in a Code Emerald. It read, "The entities may be affected by sonic vibrations, but this needs further testing. Use with extreme caution. The risks are unknown." I closed the journal with a snap, the leather cover echoing in the sudden silence of the lantern room. The Dweller, Black Lightning, Phosphorescence, and Code Emerald. This was utterly, profoundly ridiculous. More than that, a deep unease had taken root in my chest. The sun had long since surrendered to the horizon, and the world, beyond the powerful, sweeping beam of the lighthouse, was sinking into a menacing, impenetrable darkness. A loud, piercing triple squawk nearly made me leap out of my skin. A single gull, larger than the others, hopped twice on its perch directly outside the lantern room, gave me a hard, unwavering stare, its eyes like black beads of warning, and then, with a single powerful beat of its wings, flew off into the terrifying night. I was alone, utterly alone, and apparently something was coming. A chill ran down my spine, a primal fear of the unknown. My palms grew clammy. 15 minutes later, a small, worn fishing trawler chugged into view, its dim lights bobbing precariously on the restless swells. The deck was piled high, with an ominous array of crates. I breathed a shaky sigh of relief when a fisherman, a burly figure, stepped out onto the deck, waved a casual hand, and began to slowly, agonizingly slow his vessel. I'd been here since 6 o'clock, and it was nearly 9. This was the first human I'd seen in almost 3 agonizing hours. I watched him check his lines with practiced ease, then head towards the stern. He was stocky, with a salt-stained, grizzled beard, and wearing heavy, dark oilskins. I could just make out a worn-out cap pulled low over his eyes, obscuring his face. I was actually looking forward to having some interaction with another human being, a normal conversation in this desolate place, when the rhythmic thrum of his engine echoed across the water. He pulled closer, and the nascent smile froze on my face. One of the crates conspicuously placed on his deck was glowing with a faint, eerie, unnatural blue phosphorescence. It pulsed with a quiet, malevolent light, like a beating heart. I watched my heart hammering against my ribs as he prepared to drop anchor, his movements slow and deliberate. My mind was racing, frantically sifting through possible scenarios, each one more desperate than the last. Do I tell him he's the 1,000th fisherman to visit Blackwood Point, and he can trade his glowing crate for anything in the lighthouse? A bizarre, desperate bargain. No, that cargo looked incredibly valuable. He probably wouldn't fall for such a transparent trick. Do I signal him with frantic hand gestures and yell, "This is an emergency, dump that crate into the deep"? That sounded utterly ridiculous, like something out of a cheap horror movie, and it would undoubtedly land me in a federal inquiry, perhaps even a padded cell. I could just ignore the crazy old man's instructions, let fate take its course. But no, a promise had been made. I had sworn to do this job, and I would see it through. I had to try. So as he lowered his anchor, the chain rattling ominously, I called out across the water, my voice amplified by the raw, biting sea air, trying to sound casual, almost bored. "Ahoy there. Where are you heading, friend?" Smiling, a flash of white teeth in the dim light, he yelled back, his voice surprisingly cheerful, "I'm headed to Kraken's Cove, just a bit further, isn't it? Been out here for days." "I'm new around here," I replied, forcing a lightness into my tone, "but I think it's about 45 minutes, around the bend. If you sail another hour farther north, you could dock at the port of Seabrook. I hear it's truly beautiful there, and you can get fresh supplies right on the docks. They've got everything you could ever need." No, he said, his smile faltering slightly. I've been sailing for 5 hours straight. It's getting dark, and I'm ready to drop anchor, get some rest, a good meal, and go to sleep. My crew is exhausted, but maybe I'll check it out another time. Thanks for the tip. That'll be 18 minutes till your anchor hits. I stammered out the only other thing I could think of, a desperate, illogical plea. You really shouldn't anchor out in these waters with phosphorescence. It's highly unusual. He stopped adjusting his lines, his hands still on the rope, and looked up at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. Oh, why is that, son? Well, because it attracts the plankton. I forced a tight, awkward smile, feeling like the biggest idiot on the planet. I watched his face contort into a mixture of disbelief and pity. Ukukoi, I'll keep that in mind, I guess, he yelled back, his voice dripping with skepticism, as he let out more chain. I'm sure he thought I was completely unhinged, a madman trapped in a lighthouse. Well, that went absolutely nowhere. My first test, and I'd failed spectacularly. The rest of the night was eerily quiet. The wind howled, the waves crashed, but no more ships appeared. And in the morning, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky, I found the large fishing net, a heavy coarse mesh, caught some fresh fish in the shallow turbulent waters below, and filled the trough on the gull's perch below the lantern room. I sprinkled in some iridescent crushed shells as instructed, watching them shimmer like tiny jewels, but the gulls themselves were nowhere to be seen, a chilling absence that spoke volumes. Silas relieved me at 6 a.m. sharp. He arrived like a silent ghost, appearing from the mist. I told him about my one and only visitor, recounting the desperate, awkward exchange. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant, unreadable. You can only do what you can do, boy, he said, his voice flat. Some things are beyond our control. You tried. The next 2 nights were uneventful, a deceptive lull in the storm. I had only one passing vessel, a sleek modern yacht, and it wasn't carrying anything remotely phosphorescent. I began to resign myself to making $30 an hour for doing very little work, a quiet, isolated existence. After meticulously checking the gauges and polishing the lens until it gleamed, I spent the endless nights reading old weathered maritime books or simply watching the stars, tracing constellations, a temporary escape from the looming unease. Then, at 5 a.m., as the first hint of light touched the eastern sky, the gulls gave 3 sharp, piercing squawks before they exploded into flight, disappearing into the pre-dawn dark. 20 minutes later, precisely as the sun began to peek over the horizon, a sleek Coast Guard cutter sliced through the choppy water, pulling into view. An officer, a sharp, efficient woman, emerged from the cabin and made her way purposefully towards the lighthouse. She identified herself as Officer Megan Riley. Her face was grim. She was investigating a missing vessel. When she showed me a printout of a small fishing trawler, my heart sank, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. It was the same vessel, the one that had stubbornly ignored my warnings, and on the deck I could clearly see the faint, malevolent blue glow of the phosphorescent crate. It was my first visitor, the one I had failed. I told the officer everything I knew. Well, everything but the ridiculous plankton story. I left that out, certain it would only invite ridicule. She meticulously wrote down what time the vessel was last seen, where it was headed, what it looked like, and, crucially, what cargo it was carrying. She asked if anyone else was with me. I said I was alone, a truth that felt heavier than usual. Before leaving, Officer Riley handed me a new flyer, her eyes lingering on mine, and said to put it up on the bulletin board with the others. It was 5:45. The sun was just starting to break through the stubborn clouds, casting long skeletal shadows. I stepped out onto the lower deck, the wind whipping my hair, and watched the flashing lights of the Coast Guard cutter slowly, inexorably fade away into the vastness of the ocean. The bulletin board. It was on the right side of the main entrance to the lighthouse, a weathered, salt-sprayed piece of wood. Until today, consumed by my own doubts and the peculiar routine, I hadn't paid any attention to it. It was large, perhaps 6 by 8 feet, and it was utterly covered with paper notices, tacked on haphazardly. There was the typical notice of a lost fishing buoy or a routine whale sighting, but mixed in among those, a chilling pattern emerged, an unusual, unsettling amount of missing vessels. There was no certain type or size, no specific origin, but they all had one terrifying thing in common. They were all last seen carrying something phosphorescent. A cold dread settled over me. Maybe there really was something strange going on, something ancient and malevolent, in these dark, churning waters. My skepticism began to crumble, replaced by a growing, undeniable fear. After that morning's unsettling visit by the Coast Guard, a stark reminder of my failure, I started to take my job with a chilling new seriousness. Every night at work, I pored over the nautical charts, tracing the lines of the deepest trenches, memorizing the treacherous currents, studying the underwater topography. I started keeping a meticulous record of where vessels were going, how long they planned to stay, and their precise coordinates. I even managed to get Silas to grudgingly write down vessels' names, what they were carrying, and which specific areas they were exploring. I tried desperately to get him to explain the Dweller and Code Emerald, to give me more than vague warnings, but his answer was always the same, delivered with a detached, knowing gaze. "You'll have to see these things for yourself, boy. Words are merely shadows. Experience is truth." 2 weeks later, a small futuristic research submarine surfaced silently near the lighthouse, disturbing the calm. They had a team of 3 scientists, their faces etched with curiosity, working with an experimental submersible. My eyes immediately snagged on a crucial detail, a clear container of glowing plankton, pulsating with an unnatural light, tied securely to the top of their vessel. My heart leaped into my throat, so I approached them, putting on my most confident, almost theatrical voice, and told them we were having a special, unprecedented promotion at the Lighthouse. They could trade in their old, outdated plankton container for any scientific equipment in the Lighthouse. I gestured grandly to the dusty shelves. "We did," I added, "have an excellent, rare selection of vintage navigational tools, truly priceless pieces." While they considered my seemingly generous, utterly bizarre offer, their eyes narrowing in suspicion, I quickly added that I'd throw in a brand new, state-of-the-art sonar device, a top-of-the-line model. That, surprisingly, closed the deal. They looked at each other, then back at the glowing plankton, then back at the sonar device. The sonar device won. They hesitantly traded it in. Victory. A few weeks after that, a lone diver, a burly figure, swam up to the lighthouse, his sophisticated gear piled into a small dinghy, bobbing beside him, while he was in the outhouse, attending to nature's call. I moved like a phantom. I swiftly, silently stole the small, glowing dive light out of his dinghy, and with practiced ease replaced it with a top-of-the-line, non-glowing one. He never even noticed the switch, completely oblivious to the danger he'd been in. Another potential disaster averted. My scariest, most stomach-churning moment, however, occurred around 7 in the evening one night, as dusk was bleeding across the sky. A family, their faces alight with vacation cheer, was on a small, brightly colored sailboat, and they stopped for a break near the point, oblivious to the simmering danger. The little girl, no older than 6 years old, looked utterly adorable. She wore a bright bubblegum pink swimsuit with her name, Lily, embroidered on the front in cheerful, childish letters. My blood ran cold when I saw them. She also wore a pair of little, glowing, unmistakably phosphorescent water wings bobbing around her tiny arms. When I overheard the mother excitedly tell her husband they were headed towards a famous bioluminescent bay, the very same bay where the last vessel had vanished without a trace, I panicked. My mind raced, grappling for a solution. I tried everything, every absurd excuse, including frantically telling the mom there were daily, family-friendly dolphin-watching tours at the port of Seabrook, promising incredible sights. Nothing worked. They just smiled politely, thanked me, and continued their preparations. I was seriously thinking of signaling them with my skiff, preparing to stage a minor, convincing collision, a desperate act to force them away from the glowing water wings, when miraculously, the gulls saved the day. As mother and daughter were heading back to their sailboat, the little girl, distracted, heard a soft, almost melodic cooing from directly above. She stopped, her head tilting, to look up at the circling, almost guardian-like gulls. As she did, a gull, with uncanny precision, left her a present. A large sticky splat of bird guano landed squarely, perfectly, on one of her little glowing water wings. The mum, her face contorting in disgust, swore loudly, gave me a furious, dirty look, grabbed her bewildered daughter, and hurried to the sailboat. From the lantern room, my heart hammering with relief, I could clearly see her violently removing her daughter's water wings, and without a second thought, throwing them into a plastic bag, then, crucially, into the deep, dark ocean. Mission accomplished. The gulls had delivered their warning. As a silent reward, the gulls and I shared a fresh, perfectly cooked mackerel, a moment of shared understanding. Things went on like this for a while, a pattern of strange encounters, of near misses, of my desperate, often comical, interventions, and I was beginning to think, for a fleeting, dangerous moment, that I had things under control, that I understood the rhythm of this strange world, when everything went to hell, all in one catastrophic night. It started when I arrived for work at 6 o'clock and found the lighthouse utterly empty. The heavy oak door was unlocked, standing ajar. Silas's small battered dinghy was still meticulously docked, but there was no Silas, not a trace. I searched everywhere, frantically, inside and out, my shouts echoing in the empty halls. Nothing. My hands began to tremble. I called his satellite phone number, my thumb shaking, but there was no answer, just the flat, dead hum of a disconnected line. As I was standing there, phone still clutched in my hand, a chilling silence descending, I heard a deep, guttural, unmistakable growl. Walking outside, my heart pounding, I looked to the right, and there, in the middle of the dark, churning water, circling the lighthouse with furious intensity, was a large, heavily scarred great white shark. It was growling its head off, a primal warning. That must be Old Scar, I thought, the name from the journal flashing in my mind, and hadn't it said I should listen to him? Standing there, paralyzed, not sure of what to do, what action to take, I felt a sudden, powerful current of air rush past, as a gull, its wings beating furiously, flew by. It glided low, almost touching the circling shark, and then, with an almost supernatural purpose, flew up and over the towering cliffs, soaring directly towards the deepest trench. My eyes, wide with dawning horror, followed its flight. That's when I noticed that the ocean directly over the deepest trench was a deep, dark emerald green. It wasn't a trick of the light, but a vibrant, unnerving hue, and it was slowly, ominously swirling, like the malevolent formation of a colossal maelstrom, a gaping maw in the ocean's surface. Oh no, no, what did the cryptic book say? My mind raced, frantically searching for the instructions. Evacuate all nearby vessels. Shut down the shipping lanes. Load all the emergency flares into the skiff. I ran back into the lighthouse, my feet pounding on the stone steps, and grabbed the keys to the skiff, fumbling with them in my haste. In about 4 frantic minutes, I had thrown all our emergency flares, a brightly colored arsenal, into the back of the skiff, and was pulling out of the dock, the engine roaring to life. I made one quick, desperate stop at the main channel entrance to throw out some bright orange buoys, and with a heavy heart, deployed the massive, blaring, danger, abyssal shift sign. Then I floored it, the skiff leaping forward, cutting through the waves. I followed the shark, as fast as I drove, battling the choppy water. The shark was always 100 feet ahead of me, a living compass guiding me into the heart of the storm. When we reached Underwater Cave 1, a gaping maw in the rock face, the shark turned off the main current, moving with astonishing speed, swam past a rusting, ghostly cargo ship in the shallows, and dove relentlessly into the deeper, darker water. I slammed on the throttle, the engine screaming in protest, and followed, diving headfirst into the murky depths. Every couple of minutes, Old Scar would let out a deep, resonant growl, a clear, unmistakable beacon, so I followed the sound, trusting implicitly, until I burst out into an open, echoing cavern, the water suddenly still. It took me a full minute, my mind struggling to process, to register the impossible sight before me. There was a mother, her face pale with fear, her teenage son, his eyes wide with terror, and a small, trembling little girl. They were sitting by a makeshift underwater camp, a desperate attempt at sanctuary, eating dried rations, their faces illuminated by a flickering, battery-powered lantern. Old Scar was growling frantically, a mere 3 feet away, his massive jaws agape, his presence undeniable. He was right in their face, his growls echoing off the cavern walls, and they didn't even see him, completely oblivious to his gargantuan presence. I think perhaps the little girl could, because I saw her instinctively draw back, her small body pressing closer to her mum, as if sensing something unseen. They did look startled, utterly bewildered, when they finally noticed me, floating near the entrance, trying desperately to catch my breath, the water heavy around me. "You've got to go, now. Didn't you see the ocean, the maelstrom coming?" I managed to stammer, my voice muffled and distorted by the water, my words desperate. The mum, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension, looked up at the rapidly darkening emerald green water above, and she finally did start to question. "I didn't hear any storm warnings when we dove in today. Everything was clear. It came up suddenly, an unprecedented event. Emergency personnel are on the way, but you need to go now without delay." I stammered, my words tumbling out. "Leave everything behind. Take only what you can load in 5 minutes. I have to go warn the other divers," I said, my voice firm despite the rising panic within me. The mom paused, her gaze sweeping over her terrified kids. Then she nodded, a resolute look on her face. "Okay, thanks," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She immediately began to gather their essential gear, her hands moving quickly, and started packing up. The shark seemed satisfied, its growling subsiding into a low rumble. He stopped his frantic pacing and headed back toward the main current, a silent guardian moving on to the next task. When I made it back to the skiff, my muscles aching, Old Scar was circling purposefully in the middle of the water, waiting for me, a silent, powerful escort. I started up the engine, the roar echoing through the underwater cave, and followed. The shark swam right past underwater caves 2, 3, and 4, a clear signal, which I assumed meant there were no divers or submersibles there, no more lives to save. But when we got to number 5, he zipped past a bright yellow research vessel, the only one around, its lights glaring in the gloom, and headed back into the deeper water, a silent, urgent summons. As I jumped out of the skiff, the currents began to pick up, a swirling vortex of energy. I followed the growling, a primal sound that guided me, and this time, when I broke through the dense kelp forest, I was at the top of a long, treacherous underwater ridge. At the very base of the ridge was a deep, inky trench, a chasm that seemed to swallow the light. There was one large, surprisingly sturdy tent set up, a fragile haven in this hostile environment, and I could see 2 adults, their forms indistinct, sitting in underwater chairs along the very edge of the trench, their backs to me. A little boy must have been napping inside the tent, because the adults didn't notice when he quietly, curiously, stepped outside and swam directly behind the tent. A tiny, vulnerable figure. He was wearing a glowing green wetsuit, a beacon in the darkness. That's when I saw the orb, a large pulsing phosphorescent orb, radiating an unholy green light, was moving slowly, deliberately towards the trench, against the powerful current. And the little boy, mesmerized, was following it, drawn in by its hypnotic glow. Squinting my eyes, trying to pierce the gloom, I looked to where he was headed. From this distance, a mere silhouette, I could just make out a towering figure standing in the oppressive shadows of the trench. He was cloaked in absolute darkness, draped in long flowing robes that seemed to absorb the light, and it looked like he was wearing an ancient barnacle-encrusted helmet, its surface rough and jagged. With a bright band of ominous emerald light pulsing along its base, I saw his long, bony, impossibly thin tentacles pointing directly at the glowing orb, beckoning it forward, as if calling it to him. My blood ran cold. I realized with a sickening lurch, this was the Dweller. My heart sank, a heavy dead weight in my chest. A paralyzing fear took hold. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I'd never make it there in time. The distance was too great, the currents too strong. That's when the shark, Old Scar, took off like a torpedo, growling and snapping, his powerful body cutting through the water. He headed straight for the towering figure in the shadows. The little boy was only about 20 feet away from the edge of the trench, dangerously close, when the shark reached him. He stopped a few feet in front of the boy, his massive body a living wall, blocking his path. The boy, surprisingly, could clearly see the shark because he reached out a tiny hand to touch him. Old Scar, with an unexpected gentleness, turned and nudged his hand gently with his snout. The boy giggled, a bright, innocent sound in the oppressive silence, and I could see the shark slowly, carefully, begin leading him back to his bewildered parents, a massive, unlikely babysitter. I was swimming now, halfway down the ridge, my muscles burning, when I noticed that both the monstrous figure with the helmet and the pulsing green orb were gone. They had vanished, as if swallowed by the abyss. At the trench, I gasped out the maelstrom warning to the stunned parents, and that, finally, got them moving, jolting them into action. They were packed and heading toward their submersible by the time I got back to the top of the ridge, exhausted but exhilarated. There were only 7 underwater caves with docking areas, each one a potential haven or trap. Old Scar raced past number 6, a blurred shadow, so there was only one more to check, the last desperate hope. Underwater Cave 7 was known by the locals as Siren's Grotto, a place whispered about in hushed tones. I had spent many nights looking through the nautical charts, memorizing every detail, and I knew there was a small, almost hidden maintenance tunnel that ran alongside the main channel, all the way down to the deepest trench. So this time, instead of swimming through the dense kelp forest behind the shark, I turned onto the maintenance tunnel, a cramped, dark passage. It was barely wide enough for the skiff to make it through, a tight squeeze, but I drove as fast as I possibly could, praying the tunnel wouldn't collapse. The skiff jolted its way violently over large coral formations and rockfalls, the hull scraping against the rough walls along the tunnel, a symphony of grinding sounds. Coming around a wide sweeping bend, I had to slam on the brakes, the skiff shuddering to a halt. There was a lone diver, a solitary figure, standing frozen in the tunnel, his large rebreather, an alien shape on his back. He was staring directly at me, his eyes wide with unadulterated terror. But he didn't move a muscle, didn't even twitch. He looked utterly terrified, a living statue of fear. I could see with horrifying clarity that he desperately needed help. My hand moved automatically to the side of the skiff, reaching for an emergency flare, and that's when I saw something huge, something colossal, move through the water, 10 feet directly behind him. I would never have seen it, if it wasn't moving, if it hadn't disturbed the water. It was at least 20 feet tall, a monstrous, undulating shape, and I could only really discern its outline, a shimmering, distorted form. The creature's torso, head, arms, and legs were nearly invisible, like looking through shimmering heat haze on a blistering summer road, clear, yet wavery, indistinct. Its body was massive, impossibly vast, and its tendrils, long and sinuous, reached almost to the seabed, probing the darkness. It stopped a few feet into the shadows, a predatory pause, and then its head snapped around, its gaze fixated on the terrified diver. Maybe it could smell his fear, a pungent, irresistible scent in the water. I guess I'll never truly know. The creature lumbered forward, its immense mass displacing the water, until it towered over the diver, a living, breathing nightmare. Now it was directly behind him, a dark, looming shadow. His eyes were locked on mine, frozen in a silent plea for help. I thought about sounding the emergency horn, a blaring, ear-splitting sound to distract it, to break its focus, but the diver was directly between us, a fragile shield, and if it took even one step, it would crush him, flatten him into the rock. Then, like a lightning bolt, I remembered the journal. There was something, a fleeting note, about sonic vibrations being used as a weapon, a desperate, untested countermeasure. I slammed my hand down, hitting the switch for the low-frequency sonar that ran across the top of the skiff, a desperate prayer escaping my lips that it would actually work. The creature shrieked, a sound that vibrated through the water and into my very bones, a sound of pure agony, and stumbled back, its massive form recoiling. And that's when the shark, Old Scar, burst out of the shadows, a living missile, swimming directly across the creature's path, distracting it. Old Scar was growling and snapping, his powerful jaws agape, as he expertly backed up, drawing the monstrous beast away from us, away from the trap diver. It screamed again, a raw primal roar of fury. Then with terrifying speed, it went after the shark, disappearing into the deeper, darker water, a violent, unseen battle. As soon as it seemed safe, the water settling back into a terrifying quiet, I jumped out of the skiff and swam to the diver. His body was rigid with shock, his eyes still wide with terror. I quickly, almost violently, shoved him and his gear into the passenger seat, not giving him time to protest. Then I floored it, the engine screaming again, speeding back to the main current, back towards the relative safety of the lighthouse. By the time we got back to the lighthouse, cutting through the waves under the eerie glow of the lantern, I'd found out his name was Liam. He'd been doing some solo deep-sea exploration for the past 2 weeks, a lone figure in the abyss. This had been his very last dive before finally going home, a long-awaited reunion. Still in profound shock, Liam let out a shaky laugh. "Hey," he said, his voice a strained whisper, "this really was almost my last dive, like permanently. Thank you." What was that thing?" I answered honestly, my own voice hoarse. "I don't know, Liam. I truly don't know." We got back to the lighthouse around midnight, the air chilling, the silence profound. He called a friend to come pick him up, his voice still shaky, but filled with relief. While we waited, I got us a couple of steaming hot teas, some dried fish, surprisingly palatable after the night's events, and some more hardtack. He asked if the shark, Old Scar, would be okay, his brow furrowed with genuine concern, and I said, my voice filled with a hope I barely felt, "I hope so. He's a fighter." I almost said, "You can see the shark," but I stopped myself, the words catching in my throat, thinking that would lead to a cascade of even more questions, questions that I couldn't answer, questions that would unravel the delicate threads of this fragile, hidden world. After he left, his friend's boat disappearing into the vast darkness, I got a call on the satellite phone. It was Silas. A wave of immense relief washed over me. It turns out he'd had an unexpected violent encounter with a rogue wave, a monstrous wall of water that had slammed into him without warning. A passing fishing boat, by sheer luck, found him clinging desperately to a sharp rock outcropping, half drowned, and immediately called the Coast Guard. Luckily, it was a minor one, a brush with death, but not fatal. And with a few days of rest, he assured me, a slight chuckle in his voice, he should be back on his feet in no time, ready to resume his solitary vigil. When I first took this job, shrouded in mystery, I thought Silas was merely a crazy old man, a recluse driven mad by solitude. Now I know better. He's a gatekeeper, the last line of defense against the abyss, a guardian of a secret world, and that makes me his apprentice. My name is Alex. I still haven't seen the Black Lightning, and I have no idea what other horrors still lurk in the unseen depths. But for the first time in my life, I'm not running from the strange and impossible. I'm running towards it. This isn't just a job. It's not boring. It's terrifying, exhilarating, utterly essential. This, I realize, might just be my dream job. A profound, vital purpose, found at the edge of the world,